Thank you. Lydia, we had come to the point we were talking about the fact that a decision had been made, despite the events we've covered on the ward in the MVU in Winchester, that although Pippa's leave would be postponed, she would nonetheless go home. And we've talked about the arrangements for what you know of how that would happen, because a bed was waiting for her in Chelmsford.
That's right, yeah.
My understanding, and as far as you know, is that nobody in Chelmsford was alerted to the fact that during the course of those days, the Friday and the Saturday, Pippa would be at home.
As far as I know, I don't think they were, or if they are, there's no reference to that in any of the notes.
Yes. And the plans in place for supporting Pippa during her home leave amounted to a telephone call.
That's right. So technically, because Pippa hadn't been discharged from Winchester yet, she was still under their care.
Yes.
She was on temporary home leave, not discharged, so that meant that she sort of fell between support networks.
Yes.
She wasn't the responsibility of the home treatment team because she was not discharged. She wasn't under the care of the Essex team because she hadn't yet been transferred there.
Yes.
And she wasn't really under the care of Winchester because they were so far away, all they could do was telephone her.
Yes.
So she wasn't really under anyone's care anymore.
Yes.
Not in the first person anyway.
I understand. And in the event when that telephone call came, it was from a student or a student healthcare support worker. This was on the 28th of October. And my understanding is that in that telephone call, Pippa immediately reported that she wanted to die.
Yeah.
And that she had been thinking about going out for a walk by herself.
That's right, yeah. So this 28th of October was a Friday. I believe she had come home the day before on the Thursday. So even though she had been very poorly Wednesday night, she'd stayed the night instead of coming home.
Yes.
Sent home on the Thursday, and then on the Friday morning she received this phone call to check in on her where she said she wanted to die.
Yes. As a result of that, there was a follow-up call later that day.
Yes.
I think in the evening, and during that call, well, I'm sorry, I should go back. In the first call, Pippa having reported and having expressed a wish to die, she had simply been told to try to keep herself safe.
Yes, that was a try and keep yourself safe, and I'll call back later today to see how you're doing.
In the later call, and we've talked about the fluctuations in Pippa's mood, Pippa reported that she was feeling better.
Slightly better that evening, that she said she was feeling much better because she had gone out for that walk, but with her husband.
Yes.
And the children, I believe, as well.
Yes.
And when she came home, she had this call and said she was feeling much better. But by this point in the evening, the family was starting to become unwell because they had contracted the virus that she had caught from the mother and baby unit.
Yes.
So as far as I'm aware, she didn't tell the clinician on the phone that the family was starting to become unwell. Either they hadn't presented symptoms yet, or she just didn't tell them.
Well, she just didn't tell them. And in any event, nobody from Winchester sought to speak to any member of Pippa's family or support network who were there at the time, either to interrogate further what Pippa was saying about feeling slightly better, or just to check in a more general sense.
That's right. As far as I'm aware, they just spoke to her.
Yes. That was the last contact that Pippa, in fact, had with any healthcare professional. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
And as I understand it from your witness statement, and you did take us through this in your commemorative evidence, the following morning, both your mother and Pippa's husband, having been very unwell overnight, Pippa slipped out of the house in a quiet period.
Yes, so it was in the early hours of the morning. I'm not sure exactly what time, but my mother thought she was with her husband thought she was with my mother.
Yes.
They'd both been vomiting in the night and were both feeling very unwell, and they were just starting to fall asleep and sleep it off, having had a long night of being unwell. And from what I was told, Pippa had very calmly cleaned the bathroom and then quietly absconded from the house.
Yes.
That was it.
And she died, we know, by stepping in front of a train at the local train station.
So the walk she had done the day before with her husband, she had asked to walk down towards the railway line, and he had managed to persuade her not to walk that way, because he obviously was concerned. He was like, no, we're not going to walk that way.
Yes.
And then, yes, the next morning she went straight down to a level crossing near the station, near where she lives.
Yes. Thank you. Lydia, when we started your evidence, I talked about the fact that you have provided such a comprehensive witness statement, and you make a number of detailed recommendations for change there, as well as giving very full details about the particular concerns that have arisen in your mind, both from what you knew in relation to Pippa's care and treatment at the time and from the documents that you've seen thus far. Mm-hmm. Some of the recommendations you make, we've already covered, many of them, and we've talked through those as you've explained to us what the circumstances of Pippa's care and treatment were. Just looking at those now, if you could have a look, please, at page 55 of your witness statement. One of the things that you ask this inquiry to note is that you believe that the recommendations you're making in this witness statement are systemic issues which are likely to apply not just in Essex. Of course, a great deal of Pippa's care was outside of the county.
Yes, I mean, there are definitely some systemic problems. Without a doubt, there clearly seem to be some problems that are not limited purely just to Essex. I'm not saying that Essex is without fault, because clearly errors were made, mistakes were definitely made with my sister's care by the Essex Trust that were responsible for her care. But clearly, there are much wider problems. I understand the scope and the geographic limitations of this inquiry are specific to Essex. However, I think it's important to highlight how these are indicators of much broader problems within NHS mental health services.
Yes.
For example, lack of beds, which I think has been stated quite a lot.
Yes.
Clearly a lack of specialist provision, an inconsistency with continuation of care. So where a patient is placed out of area, seems to be a lack of clarity over the responsibility for who is having oversight of that patient's progress. I do understand from some of the evidence provided by EPA as part of this inquiry that they are now putting into place a sort of care coordinator role that will oversee patients out of area, but it does feel that should have been introduced a long time ago.
Yes.
And I would be interested to find out through this inquiry how comprehensive that's going to be. If it is a matter of someone updating a spreadsheet once a week to make sure that a patient is still in a certain hospital, then in my view that is insufficient. I believe that role should be a person who actually is familiar with the patient, who actually has met the patient, who knows their medical history and is a continued point of contact, not just an assigned medical professional that may change from week to week.
Yes.
You need that continuation of care within the service from someone.
Yes.
It needs to be just one person who sort of knows where you are,
yes.
especially if you're out of area, who can have that oversight and make sure that you're receiving the treatment that you require. I think that's really important to stress. It's not enough to just offer a person, any person,
yes.
to keep track of where a patient is. It needs to have that personalised one-to-one contact with an individual,
yes.
who can know what's in the best interests of the patient.
Yes.
Which is why the mention of an advocate earlier I think is so very important. It was a really positive, good offer from Staffordshire that clearly worked in my sister's favour, that she felt she had someone to speak for her. And I believe that advocate should, it doesn't have to be the same person all the time, but anyone that's suffered mania or any kind of mental health condition that may affect their ability to judge what's in their best interests, should have an advocate at all times,
yes,
who is very familiar with their history, who can, even if they're no longer having or displaying symptoms of mania. It's hard for me to say this because I've never experienced it myself, but from this contact that I have had with a loved one, what I would urge and recommend from this inquiry is that there is a representative for a person who has suffered that kind of illness. Because even when you are well, I imagine there would be a degree of uncertainty about what exactly happened
yes,
during a time when you were very unwell. And to sort of reflect on that period and know fully what happened, or know fully how to ensure your best interests are being kept at the forefront
yes,
of your treatment. It's important to have an outside eye. I mean, back in the day, we would say our family GP would know us, we would grow up with them, they would remember what we had been through, they would be able to advise on best treatment for you because
yes,
they know you. And I guess if there are patients who are likely to suffer, I say suffer, I don't mean that word, I'm sorry. If there are patients that are likely to undergo or live with mental health conditions that affect their understanding of reality, or that cause them to doubt their own memories, their own life experiences,
yes,
then that patient deserves to have a representative who can speak for, who can support them with making judgments about their treatment going forward.
yes,
It's very hard for that person to be a family member or
yes,
even a close friend,
of course,
because you are subjective. So obviously, as part of this inquiry, many of the core participants, myself included, want families to be more closely involved. Of course we do. We want to be involved in our loved ones' care. However, I say that in the same breath as we are also sometimes conflicted.
Of course.
We want our loved ones to come home. We want to take care of our loved ones. When our loved one is begging us, I want to come home, how can you say, no, you must stay, I'm not going to take... If someone you love is begging you for this, that or the other, all you want to do is support them, and you believe that they know what they want. And sometimes that can mean it's difficult for us to make the best decisions.
of course,
If you had a third-party advocate, which should really be their doctor, their clinician, their psychiatrist, whatever, that person's role is to say, all of this in mind, I still feel that you could do with further treatment, further medication, or a trip home, whatever. But because patients are seeing so many different doctors, so many different specialists, how can you have that continuity of care with anyone within the NHS? You can't. We don't have the luxury of that one-to-one time.
yes,
And you also made the point, didn't you, about the patient's desire to protect the family, which might be overcome by somebody else advocating on their behalf.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, as we have discussed today, my sister was very adept at masking, and many patients are,
yes,
for whatever reasons. And you need a third party, an outside eye, to say, look, I know this person, I've seen this person in highs and lows, and I think right now, although they may appear to be doing better, they really actually still need more support in this area,
Yes.
that area.
And
And it's a luxury that we may not be able to afford within the NHS at this time, but I truly believe that if there is an advocate for those most vulnerable patients that is with them, it could save lives.
yes. Thank you. That kind of continuity of care, and what you're talking about really is this, fair, is an individualised approach to care, which is continuous and from someone who has ongoing knowledge of that person, and, as you say, of how they might present. That would also allow for a proper overarching risk assessment to be carried out, which is not entirely reliant on whatever that person is saying on a given day or at a certain point on a given day, because one of the other points that you make throughout your witness statement is that all the correspondence and all the engagement from the trust that went to Pippa's husband, he of course relied on. Mm-hmm. He relied on guidance from those clinicians. Yep. And so when he was told home leave is fine and she's coming home, that placed effectively your mother and Pippa's husband on suicide watch.
Basically, yes.
Without guidance.
Yeah. Sorry to jump in, but
please
that's
do.
Effectively what it was.
Yes.
They were on suicide watch with no support information specific to suicide at all. I think there was a small handout given about anxiety.
Yes.
But it wasn't enough. It was insufficient. And when you're being told, oh, your loved one is well enough to come home, I mean, that's a case for celebration. Great, come home. Finally, yes. You're home. Let's be together.
Yes.
Not, oh, we're sending them home because, quite frankly, we don't really want them on the ward right now, and it would be more convenient if they weren't here, or maybe this might help, but we don't know for certain if it will help, but let's give it a try.
Yes.
I mean, doing things like that, it puts lives at risk. Pippa's life was put at risk by sending her home. I'm not saying that she wouldn't have tried to take her life another day. It could have happened later. It might still have happened. But I do know that sending her home almost guaranteed her death, because it was saying, you are now out of the hands of medical professionals.
Yes.
And you are in the hands of basically your family, and now your family has been made incapacitated, so they can't look after you either.
Yes.
So you have no support. And I do not understand, I will never understand how a patient who is as high risk as my sister, being sent home knowing everything that they knew, knowing that she had made multiple attempts on her life just within a few days, and immediately before leaving, if she's saying to you, I want to die, in no uncertain terms, not equivocating, saying directly, I want to die, that the appropriate medical response to that is to call back later. I will never understand that. What more does a patient have to do to inform medical professionals that they need help?
Yes.
There is nothing more that she could have said or done to alert medical professionals that she needed help. And to not even sort of arrange for a home treatment team person to come and visit, for no one to come and visit, to just sort of, let's wait it out.
Yes. Well, and also, as you've pointed out, there was a bed waiting for her there in Chelmsford.
There was, yes. I will never understand why no action was taken, or that what I think upsets me most, actually, within all of this, apart from my sister's actual death, is that in the inquest, when the report is being made by Southern Health into what happened, they still feel that she received appropriate care, and that they wouldn't change anything that was done.
Yes.
How can that be the case? How? She died. That is the ultimate worst outcome.
Yes.
How can it be appropriate care? And what frightens me about that is that further patients will be put at risk, because they seem to think that is appropriate, to send patients home when they're suicidal, to provide little to no information or support for families.
Yes.
And to assume that even if someone is reporting suicidal thoughts, it's still not enough to hospitalise them again.
Yes.
I don't know what more Pippa could have done to ask for help.
Yes.
Or how clear, she couldn't have made it any clearer. And the fact that the trusts that was responsible for her care not only failed to acknowledge that they didn't do enough, but that they didn't even, EPUT didn't, as far as I'm aware, provide any information or evidence for her inquest.
No.
That we still to this day don't have any information about her stays in EPUT facilities.
Yes.
I don't understand what's the point of an inquest if trusts are not required to provide the information about what happened. How can any lessons be learned? Constantly talking about learning lessons, but how can you be learning lessons if you're not providing information and not attending, not listening, not following up with families?
Yes.
You know, the whole point about inquests surely is to make sure this never happens again, and yet it does. We keep seeing more patients. How many patients? We still don't even know in this inquiry how many patients, how many people have died, not just been ill, but have actually lost their lives.
Yes.
We don't know because there are so many. And for my sister to sort of become a statistic, a number, a bit of data that can't be found, can't be traced, can't be logged. She's not a number, she's not a statistic, she was a person that people loved and cared for. And surely we should be treating these patients how we would wish to be treated if we were to become ill.
Yes.
Because what happened to Pippa could happen to any woman. And it shouldn't have happened, what happened to her.
Lydia, thank you.
That's okay.
At this stage, unless there's anything else in your recommendations or any other part of your witness statement that you particularly want to highlight now, what I was going to say is that I don't have any questions for you, and that unless the chair has any questions for you, that would conclude your evidence. And I understand we did see some photographs of Pippa when you gave your commemorative evidence in September, but I understand that there's another photograph today that in a moment, unless there's anything else that you want to add, I'll ask to go up on the screen.
I would just like to finish by saying I know that there never seem to be enough resources within the NHS, and to request certain provisions feels like a luxury. But if anything comes out of this, we ask for a more person-centric approach to care.
Yes.
Everything seems to be about systems and processes and procedures, and yet so often we see these procedures and protocols not working or failing patients because they're not being treated necessarily as individuals. And if we want people to get better, if we want for ourselves and our loved ones and our children to get better, to make good recoveries, lifelong recoveries, because many of these patients will have lifelong illnesses that they have to live with, and that their families have to live with, that the treatment needs to be centred on the individual, that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to mental health care, and that you can't just put a sort of date on being well on patients. Just like you wouldn't with any physical illness. You wouldn't say to a cancer patient, you're going to be well by this date, you know, or someone who's broken their leg, you're going to be fine up and around by this exact point.
Yes.
To give room to breathe, for patients to be given time to recover, and to constantly find ways to personalise that care, have a continuation of care, and where that isn't possible, where treatment does need to be given out of area or with different members of staff, that there is some sort of resource, some sort of provision to ensure that there is this overarching, as you say, overarching view on how is this person doing.
Yes.
That there is some sort of safety net in place. And I would say the same for families involved in inquests too. It feels like the inquest happens and it's done. Bye. We've heard you. The lessons will be learned. Goodbye. And actually, the real world doesn't work like that. We're not all bits of paper being pushed around on bits of table. You know, why is there not a facility within inquests to be staying in touch with families afterwards, so that families know, oh, these lessons are being learned, let's see what's happening. Because families don't stop caring one day when the inquest is over. I want to know that the things that you said were going to change have changed.
Yes.
I want contact. I want to know that mistakes aren't going to be repeated.
Yes.
And I want you to talk to me and ask me what I think, whether you want to hear it. But, you know, this is about it's about relationships, isn't it? It's about staying in touch and talking to people, not just talking with families whilst you're loved one is in the hospital, but beyond, about understanding that you have to keep talking, you have to keep checking in, you have to keep learning from what's happened so that it hasn't all been in vain. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to see the photograph of your sister, but before we do, I want to say thank you very much indeed for your incredibly powerful evidence.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. Thank you. We have another witness, so I will rise.
We do. A short break, yes.
10 minutes?
5 to 10 minutes.
5 to 10 minutes.
Hi.
Ms. Paxson.
Good afternoon, Chair. We are ready for the evidence of Alan Oxton. Please be sworn. Thank you.
So for you to affirm your oath, you can remain seated and just read from the card.
I, Alan Oxton, do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Yeah, Alan James Oxton.
Thank you. You are the son of Stephen Alan Oxton, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, I am.
And your father was born on the 1st of November 1958,
Yes.
and he died on the 1st of April 2012.
Yes.
By way of background, the inquiry sent you what we term a Rule 9 request, requesting your evidence for the inquiry. Is that right?
Yes, it did.
And in response to that request, did you provide a witness statement?
I did indeed.
And is it right that you have a copy in front of you?
Yes, I do.
At the top of your copy, it says Alan Oxton, your name?
Yes.
And is it right that on the last page, it gives your, well, it's not exactly a signature, but it's your name as a signature. And it's dated the 24th of May, 2025.
Yes.
Have you had the opportunity to review that recently?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that it is accurate?
I can confirm.
And is it right that you would like this statement to be considered as your evidence to the inquiry?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Now, I will be asking you some questions about your witness statement. We will not be going through it line by line, but you can be assured that the chair and the inquiry team will consider all of it in detail and very carefully. I would also like to acknowledge that you have provided commemorative evidence to the inquiry before, and we are very grateful to you for your assistance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, just as a reminder, I will not be asking you to name any staff members. That is in line with the restriction order that has been imposed.
Yeah.
The evidence that we will cover today will be structured in 3 parts. First, I will go through a timeline in relation to your father's care. Second, I will ask you some questions about your concerns in relation to his care, his treatment, his death, and also what happened after his death. And third and finally, I will ask you some questions about your recommendations to the chair.
Mm-hmm.
Is that all right?
Yes, thank you.
If I can start, therefore, with the timeline. Now, this is in paragraphs 2 to 17 of the witness statement, in case that assists. Now, is it right that your father's mental health difficulties began following the murder of his own father in January of 1998?
Yes, his dad, my granddad, was murdered stabbed in London in 1998, and my dad was working as a lorry driver, and he was overseas in Germany, so he got flown back from work following his death. Then went through all the subsequent investigation with the police and identifying the body, etc.
And following the incident, is it right that he started to suffer from flashbacks of that process?
Yeah, from memory, what he used to go on about, he used to identifying the body was the main, and he had a lot of anger about his father's killer, and him being released from prison. Yeah.
And am I right in understanding that he first sought assistance from his GP some 2 years after the incident?
Yeah.
Yes. And was this initial, well, in fact, having sought assistance from his GP, was there a referral?
Yeah, it wasn't accepted the first time round, and it took subsequent referrals from his GP for them to actually admit him into the mental health and give him treatment.
Is it right that he first sought assistance on the 26th of January, but it wasn't until the 14th of February and a re-referral that in fact an assessment by a community psychiatric nurse took place?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And is it right that he was then diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yeah, directly back to his father's murder.
Yes. And he accepted cognitive behavioural therapy and 4 sessions of eye movement desensitization.
Yeah.
And I think your statement says restricting, but you think that this should be reprocessing or restructuring in relation to the treatment that he received?
Yeah, he saw treatment up until, with the same lady, same nurse, for up until about 2009.
That's right.
That's when he was discharged.
It was in October of 2009 that he was discharged,
Yeah.
Is that right? And during this time period, did you say that he continued to receive treatment from the same
Yeah,
nurse?
majority of it was from the same lady.
Thank you. And following his discharge in October 2009, is it right that his mental health then deteriorated again?
Yeah, he'd be very up and down, but then in 2009, he then got re-referred again by his GP.
Yes. In fact, on the 5th of February, so some 4 months after his discharge, is that right?
Yeah, it didn't take too long.
And he received top-up support but was discharged again in May 2010, is that right? And then is it right that he was re-referred on 2 occasions thereafter by his GP, but these were refused?
Yeah, he received support from a lady who was, she was in charge of support after murder and manslaughter, and they offered quite a bit of support. He went on retreats with them, and obviously they've got experience with help supporting families who have had loved ones murdered, and that they were his main support because the trust didn't re-admit him.
And is it right that on the 19th of February of 2011, so the following year, your father attempted an overdose?
Yes, that was the first one. I believe it was at Colchester General Hospital.
Yes.
But again, I haven't got full access to the medical records. But I recall the first one being at Colchester.
And is it right that he was assessed again 4 days later following contact by Rethink? And following that reassessment, there was a referral to a consultant psychiatrist?
Yes.
And is it right that that consultant psychiatrist advised that an outpatient appointment was not appropriate?
Yeah, you would imagine, and you would like to think that once someone tries to actively take their life for the first time, that they would be re-admitted and there would be some form of care and support there for him, but I don't know the background behind it, or the sort of like reasoning behind it, but you would like to think that there would be some form of support after that, but there wasn't.
Is it right that after that refusal, as it were, your father raised his concerns with the trust about the services he received? Do you know if there was any outcome to his doing so?
I believe he met with the community mental health team manager of Colchester to discuss his concerns, but that was all I've got from the records.
Thank you. And is it right that on the 27th of April, so some 2 months later, your father overdosed on medication and alcohol, and this time was taken to Broomfield A&E?
Yeah, that was correct, and this one was much more serious in terms of he was unconscious. Whereas I think the first one was felt like more of a I need help. The second one, it was him trying to end his life and meaning it.
And is it right that he was then, in fact, taken to the Linden Centre under Section 2?
Yeah, he was sectioned there from the 28th of April to the 5th of May.
And following his discharge, did both yourself and your father make written complaints about his lack of care and treatment?
Yes, we did, because we didn't feel like it was properly addressed after the first one. We felt like we weren't getting anywhere. I believe I also wrote to the local MP.
Thank you. I will ask you some questions about those complaints when we get to your concerns. In May of 2011, your father attended a psychological assessment and specialist psychometric testing, which concluded that he was still suffering from complex trauma with elements of PTSD and personality difficulties. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And his CPA review in July concluded that he should continue with outpatient clinic appointments with his CPN. Is that right?
Yes, that is.
And was he then also added to the waiting list for PTSD therapy?
Yes, and to my knowledge, he should have been added to the list far sooner and the issues addressed. But for some reason, the trust refused, didn't want to help, didn't help.
And on the 21st of October, your father began cognitive analytical therapy. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And shortly thereafter, 4 days later, he overdosed for a third time.
Yes. He attended an inquest in regards to his father's death.
Yes. And was he admitted following this overdose?
Admitted? He wasn't admitted, no.
He wasn't admitted. Is it right? In fact, yes. Is it right that he was then again referred to the care of the community psychiatric nurse?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, between November 2011 and March 2012, is it right that he attended multiple outpatient appointments with his consultant and the CPN?
Yes.
And then on the 7th of March, he took a fourth overdose and was referred to the crisis resolution and home treatment team.
Yes, for the fourth time, yeah.
And he was assessed on the 8th of March and discharged to the team for 7 days thereafter. Is that right?
Yeah. The individual then who assessed him in the hospital then came to the home address and saw him a number of days later.
Now that provides the background to the 31st of March and the 1st of April, which is the time period when your father passed away.
Yep.
Now, is it right that on the 31st of March, your father called the crisis resolution and home treatment team and requested to be sectioned.
Yeah, before that though, he phoned me. At the time I lived in Manchester and worked up there. I was just finishing a night shift, so I put my phone onto silent, and so I didn't hear the call, but I had a voicemail. It was my dad in a distress situation, wanted to end his life. He'd had enough, and he wasn't happy, and he was in severe distress. So I received a phone call I didn't receive a phone call. I got woken up by my partner at the time because my dad's girlfriend had phoned her to let her know that what had happened, and he'd phoned the crisis resolution and home treatment team, requested to be sectioned. Then his house backed on to the main railway tracks between to Liverpool Street from like Colchester. He lived at Whittam at the time, and he'd gone out. It was all big hedges, and so his arms were all cut because of all the thistles, but he managed to fight his way through it and get onto the railway tracks, which is when the police got him and sectioned him. So I missed his call, and that was the last time he sort of like made contact with me, was me finding a voicemail, which kind of lives with me really.
Did the police, you said the police sectioned him?
Yeah, they got him and they took him to Shannon House in Harlow.
That's right. And we will go through the details of the transfer, but is it right that he was then transferred to the Lakes in Colchester?
Yeah, they done the initial assessment in Shannon House, then they transferred him later on to the Lakes in Colchester. I believe, from notes I've received and records I've got, that they were going to take him to the Linden Centre, but they couldn't because the section that they would have took him to, I don't know, the ward that had needed treatment because the police had used CS gas in it or something like that. So they couldn't take him to where he'd previously been and who knew about him.
Do you know if you or your family were involved in the discussions about where he would go?
No, I was just told that he was taken to Shannon House.
And he arrived at the Lakes on the 31st of March.
Yeah.
Is it right that several hours, well, in fact, the morning after his arrival at the Lakes, your father barricaded himself into his room and died by ligature?
Yes. In the morning after, so he spent the night there, and when he wasn't being watched, observed, which is another issue, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a little bit, he barricaded himself in his room and still had access to his belt, which is another point of which I have issues and concerns that I would like to raise over, and used his belt as for ligature on the window of his ward.
Thank you. I would like to turn to your concerns now, if I may. Mm-hmm. The first concern relates to your father's treatment in the community. Now, you referred to the fact that your father was refused a referral on several occasions.
Yeah.
In fact, I have four: the 26th of January 2000, 8th of July 2010, 28th of July 2010, and February of 2011 after his first overdose. Mm-hmm. On any of the occasions where the referral was not accepted, were you or your father provided with any reasons why?
I wasn't. I'm not entirely sure my father was ever provided any. It's very hard to say because he wrote a number of complaints, raised it a number of times. So did his GP. So I cannot recall, I'm afraid. But
Thank you. And is it your view that your father should have been seen sooner as an outpatient?
I believe they saw him as an outpatient too late and readmitted him too late into their care, and he was already on a steep decline when he started trying to take his own life on those 4 occasions. And I'm not saying that he would be here today. I'm not saying he would have recovered and everything would have been merry, but his life would have been prolonged if they readmitted him earlier and saw him earlier before he started going on these suicidal attempts and sharp declines.
Can I just ask you about this decline? Was he noticeably declining each time, getting worse, or was it a fairly steady presentation during the time that he was making these suicide attempts?
The first one, I believe, was it didn't feel as it was more of a cry for help. I felt.
Yep.
But the 3 after that, I firmly believe that they were attempts on his life, and he wanted to take his own life.
Yep.
My dad's girlfriend at the time, I recall going through a lot of his stuff after his death, and she moved out of the house that they lived in together to another house, and I helped her move. I'm not in contact with her anymore, so she couldn't partake in it. But we were emptying her food cupboard to move house, and right at the back of the food cupboard, the top shelf, he was a very tall man, she was very short, right at the back on the top shelf was a rope with a ligature around it. So it was fairly obvious what he was going to do it one way or another. But yeah, it was the first one. It was the person who killed my granddad, his dad, he passed away in prison. He had a heart attack in prison, and I believe that kind of coincided with when he declined.
Right.
And part of me is of the belief that he spent such a long time trying to keep his father's killer in prison, and after he died in prison, there wasn't much to live for him, and I feel like his purpose kind of, and that's when the steep decline started, I believe.
Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Paxson.
Thank you. Was there anything else that you wanted to share in relation to your father's treatment in the community?
I'm sure we'll go on to it later on, but I took a private case against the trust after my father's death, and the solicitors that I used had got an assessment from another doctor, and they were of the opinion that my father's care was below the acceptable level. So, yeah.
Thank you. If I could turn now to his admission in Shannon House first. Mm-hmm. Is it right? Well, we've gone through it. It's right, isn't it, that your father was admitted because he requested to be sectioned?
Yes.
And just to be clear, why do you think it was that he requested to be sectioned?
Because he wanted to kill himself. Pure and simple. His words: "If I was a dog, they would put me down." That's how he felt about himself. He was sick, he was unwell, and they don't let dogs live on like that. And that if he was a dog, the vets would put him down because he was unwell.
And you have raised a number of concerns in your statement about your father's care at Shannon House.
Yeah.
One of those concerns is that there were conflicting versions of events about what happened in relation to the search of your father's property.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? If it assists, it's at paragraph 18 of your statement.
Thank you. My dad was taken to Shannon House by the police. And then when he was searched, they recorded a number of items, and I believe it was only valuables that they recorded. There was conflicting accounts from 2 trust employees regarding the search of my father. One stated that he was searched, a belt was taken, but I believe he couldn't recall the colour, style or anything about the belt. And then the witness or the other person who was present to obviously witness, these things have to be done to corroborate the story. The other one couldn't remember seeing a belt, him being searched. So there was conflicting views from the NHS staff who admitted him into Shannon House. There was another one who had spent a large portion of time, I can't remember the exact amount, I think it was about a couple of hours, observing my dad, and he couldn't remember seeing a belt either. So it concerns me that you've got someone's lying at the end of the day, because you've got staff A saying, we searched him, we took the belt, but I can't recall it. You've got staff B saying, I don't even recall searching him, let alone there being a belt. Yes, it's alarming.
Is the case essentially that you do not know
No.
what has happened in relation to his belt at Shannon House?
No, I've been through all the various investigations, inquiries, which I've been offered part of, and I've never got an answer. Never known or even got close to anyone asking the question, what actually happened?
And how do those inconsistencies and this lack of ultimately knowing what happened, how does that make you feel?
You can't move on without knowing. And that's why I'm here today. Because hopefully at some point I'll get the answer of, yes, we took the belt and gave it back to him, or no, we didn't take the belt.
Still at Shannon House, you make an observation in your witness statement about concerns to do with the manner in which your father's level 3 observations were conducted. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, that was...
It's at paragraph 19, closest.
Thank you. Yes, so he was subject to level 3 observations, which no expert, but that was constant supervision, is what I was informed. And this was taking place behind a glass panel within an office, which was contrary to the inpatient observation and engagement policy, because essentially they weren't engaging with him, they were just literally watching him. So it's hard to do a risk assessment, it's hard to see if someone's improving, declining, all these sorts of things that they should be doing. Obviously, they can't. You can't speak to someone through a glass.
I'd like to move now to the transfer from Shannon House to the Lakes. Is it right that in fact, can you remember the reason for the transfer?
Yeah, obviously, they couldn't take him to the Linden Centre initially, like I said, and Shannon House only had access to a limited portion of my dad's medical records, so they were going to transfer him to the Lakes ward in Colchester.
So as far as you were aware, it was not about beds or capacity, it was about where the information in relation to your father's care was held. Thank you. And is it right that you also raise a concern about the lack of accompaniment in the transfer?
Yes, the approved mental health professional chose not to escort my dad to the Lakes from Shannon House, and they delegated the responsibility to the ambulance staff who were transferring him. The approved mental health professional stated that they didn't because they had to attend another assessment. But then the serious investigation report actually identified that this wasn't the case. They didn't have to attend another assessment.
Right.
So they had, again, in fact, lied. And so why they couldn't transfer why they couldn't attend to transfer my dad is a mystery. As again, that's something I don't know and would like the answers to, please.
And is it right that also, by virtue of not having accompaniment from Shannon House to the Lakes, you also do not know what happened to your father's possessions?
No. From obviously, we don't know whether the belt was taken or whether it was whether that was given back to him, whether that was given to the ambulance staff. The only things what were included on the property sheet, what were given back to him, were his mobile phone and his wallet. And then we don't know what happened with that when he got to the Lakes, because there was no, the transfer was done through the ambulance staff.
Yes. So, in fact, he was returned some possessions.
Yeah.
But you don't know the extent of it?
No, because they only recorded the valuables, so what else they took, I do not know. But I know that they returned his wallet and his phone, because that was recorded on the property sheet in Shannon House, and then that was handed in to the Lakes ward sometime during the night.
Yes.
So that would have been returned back to him. But that, to me, then alarms. He can't have been searched when he was going into the Lakes, because you would have thought that they would have taken those valuables off of him, like the search at Shannon House, which has its own issues regarding the belt.
Yes. I would like to move on to his arrival at the Lakes, and if I may, although I understand, of course, that the retention of the belt is a very key concern of yours, would like to start by asking you about 3 other concerns that you raise.
Yeah.
One is it right that one of your concerns is that you have no real understanding of the handover to the staff at the Lakes?
No idea what happened.
And is a second concern of yours that your father was, in fact, on arrival at the Lakes at around 6:30 p.m., not seen until 10 p.m. that evening?
Yes.
For the purpose of an assessment?
He arrived at 6 by ambulance. The doctor who was due to see him was finishing off duty at 9 at 2100 hours, so that was 3 hours. And then he or she notified another doctor who was starting their shift that they had to see my father, and then they didn't turn up until,
I believe your statement says 10 p.m.
10 p.m.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, so 1 hour after that shift started. I believe that there was no urgency expressed that first job is to see this man, because he has been here since 6 o'clock. Yeah.
And it may be a question with an obvious answer, but what is your concern about this delay?
Well, my concerns are that there's no risk assessment. He's not been looked at, he's received no real form of treatment. He's just been left and admitted into the Lakes, and that's where and they've just kind of dumped him there, basically, it felt like to me, without any form of assessment. And I lived in Manchester and was not communicated any form. I'd phoned up the Lakes when I could get through to them, and their words were, "He is in a place of safety, don't worry." Which, if I knew everything now, what I knew then, I wouldn't believe, because there was no way that man was in a place of safety.
Is it right that on arrival at the Lakes, he was downgraded from a level 3 observation to a level 2 observation?
Yeah, he was he was level 3, so as far as, again, I'm no medical expert, but he was constant level 3 while he was in the Lakes. Then when he arrived at the Lakes, it was downgraded to level 2, and can I just draw my attention to something? Draw your attention to something in this serious incident report.
Do.
Right. In a bit, page 21, it refers to a doctor initially indicating a need for level 3 observations, but then they ultimately agreed on level 2 were appropriate. So there were discussions when my father arrived at the lakes that he should have been continued at level 3, but for some reason this doctor ultimately agreed with another one that level 2. So I'd just like you to highlight that.
And was that done before he was assessed?
Yes. My father, when the doctor finally visited him at 10 o'clock, he didn't want to engage with the assessment doctor because he'd been there for however, between the times we stated, and that his words were that he was tired, he wanted to sleep. So they've missed a key time, a large amount of time there to assess him.
And within that time period, having not assessed him to begin with, they downgraded his risk?
Yes, they had.
Do you know based on what information they did that?
No, I wasn't informed why they downgraded it, but I recall that there being a discussion. Should we do level 3? Should we do level 2? And the lakes ultimately decided on level 2. That was a question I put to the series incident report. But I'm sure we'll go into the incident report later. But yeah, thank you.
Moving on to the belt and the search process at the lakes. Now, you have already set out that you essentially don't know what happened to the belt at Shannon House in the transfer to the lakes.
Yeah.
Do you know what searches were undertaken when he arrived at the lakes?
No idea whatsoever.
Now, your statement at paragraph 22 says that staff indicated that his property was searched, but nothing was removed from his person. In what context did the staff indicate this? Do you remember?
No, I don't.
So is the position... Apologies.
At the end of the day, the wallet and the phone were handed in at a later date.
Yeah.
So if the person was searched, surely that would have been taken off at the time of search. So
Yes.
it's a question for me that was he actually searched? Because he's gone in with his wallet and his phone, which was previously taken off him.
Yes. So essentially, is the position that you do not know if he was searched?
No.
You do not know if he was searched, what was taken from him?
No.
All you know is that he ended up in possession of the belt.
Yes.
I want to briefly talk about risk assessments. Now, I understand that the inquest stated that the risk of self-harm was correctly assessed, but that there was an incomplete transfer of the risk assessment, is the conclusion that the inquest came to,
Yes.
which resulted in a lower level of observation being applied. Now, I also understand from your statement that staff at the lakes made a point to you about how your father's previous attempts of suicide were by way of overdose, and as such they were not concerned about forms of suicide such as by ligature. And as I understand it, the staff also mentioned to your father's girlfriend when she attended the ward later after his death that had he not had the belt he would have found an alternative method. Now, what if any concern do you have about the way in which the staff appeared to approach your father's risk of self-harm?
My view is that if a man or woman wants to end their life, wants to take their own life, that they'll use any means necessary. And they were confident that he wasn't of a risk through ligature, because previous attempts had been medication, trying to get on the train tracks, and also he'd expressed a desire to crash his car and killing himself. So there's issues things to be raised there, that if they think that's the situation, if they believe that they're just going, oh, he's never expressed that desire before, so
there is no risk of it.
there is no risk. I believe that's wrong.
And you've said both in evidence today and also in your statement that the staff repeatedly reassured you that he was in a place of safety. Was that by way of a phone call to you when you called them, in fact?
Yeah,
on that day?
I spoke to the Lakes the night the night of he got taken there, so somewhere between 6 and 10, and I was told that he was in a place of safety. Rest assured, he'll be fine, we'll look after him. But that's not the case, is it?
No. I would like to turn to the ward environment, if I may. And there are 2 points that I want to ask you about that come from your statement. The first is, you mentioned that your father was able to move furniture around. Yeah. Again, this might seem like a question with an obvious answer, but what is your concern about that?
You can move it around to a state that you can barricade yourself in the room. B, you managed to move it around undetected. Considering he's on level 2 observations, you would imagine that would be pretty hard, but apparently level 2 observations mean you can throw wardrobes and chest of drawers in front of doors and no one bats an eyelid.
Thank you.
And I'm sure we've gone through there's so many families here and given evidence this week, giving evidence in the future, and I'd be amazed if there's not more issues where there's barricaded rooms, because considering the Linden Centre was being treated because of CS gas, I'm sure there was a few wardrobes and things thrown around in there, and I'm sure other cases have got similar nature, and I'm sure there's repeats again and again, and yeah, you shouldn't be able to move around the wardrobe and chest of drawers while you're under observation and not it be not identified or noted.
Mm-hmm. You also refer to the window, and you query whether that had previously been highlighted to the trust as a cause for concern. Is this something that you have been able to raise with the trust?
I remember liaising with someone in the trust, and they offered me the chance to go to look at the window. I declined. They then stated that the window had been changed after his death, and I was shown a picture after his death of the window being changed.
Sorry, just to be clear, so they offered that you go and see the window...
Which my dad hanged himself from, yeah.
Right. And then they offered to show you... Well, they sent you a picture of the change that they had made to the window. Is that right?
Yeah.
Did they offer... At the time that they offered you the opportunity to see the window, that was after or before they had changed the window?
Both, I believe.
Do you remember what the intention was before?
No. I don't...
Thank you. I would like to now move on to the complaints that both you and your father made about his lack of treatment. Mm-hmm. First, your father's complaint, without giving any names, do you recall who he complained to or where his complaint was sent to?
He sent it to the clinical manager of Oyster Court, of the community mental health team in Colchester. So they would have received the referrals for him to be reassessed.
Right.
And then they said no. Yeah, those were who he referred them to.
And do you recall what effect, if any, those responses had on him?
Yeah, he just felt like he was getting knocked back. Each time it was getting profoundly worse.
Yes.
He was getting nowhere. They weren't interested in helping him. They didn't want to help him, even though they'd it seemed to me like they'd seen him as an outpatient for so long in the initial, 2000 to 2009, and there was an unwillingness to do any more until he seriously started to try and take his own life.
And did you make any complaints prior to your father's death?
I had, yeah.
And who did you make them to?
I made them to the same...
The same place?
Yeah.
And did you receive any responses?
I did, and I believe that is where we had the CPA...
Review.
The review. Trying to think where we are now. Probably backwards.
I'm about to take you to, I believe, paragraph 27, but let's see where we go. Did you make one complaint prior to his death?
Is it prior to his death?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe I made one.
One complaint.
Yeah.
And then is it right that you state that the trust only really engaged with you after his death once you put in a complaint?
Yeah, it was very difficult because I wanted answers from the trust and the Lakes. I would come up speaking to individuals who were the ward manager there, and I requested medical records. I wanted to know what had happened, i.e. what the circumstances, and they didn't come forward with much. They come forward with policies and procedures, but there was little to no empathy, and they weren't supporting me in. If you want his medical records to see what happened, there was no signposting for support or assistance. I spoke to the police officer who has investigated it, and he was the one who advised me, if you want all this, put in a formal complaint. And that's what I did. And it shouldn't take that. There was no open honesty.
Yes. And in fact, so I'm just going to go back a step to the complaint that you made prior to his death. Is that another example of where you made a complaint and then you actually did get a result, which was the CPA review?
Yeah, but again, that felt like that was on the back of a suicide attempt,
right,
and a serious one, and then they suddenly thought, oh, we better do something. But by then it was too late. He was already on that steep downward trend.
Do you recall specifically what you complained about?
Yeah, the lack of support, them saying the referrals, them saying no.
Right.
We're not going to readmit him. We're not going to treat him.
Right. I would like to talk to you now about the lack of engagement in a little bit more detail after your father's passing. Is it right that there came a time when you tried to speak to the ward in order to ascertain what had happened?
Yeah.
And can you tell us a bit more about that? In what context did it happen and how did it happen?
I phoned them and wanted the answers of, well, was he being observed? Why did he have his belt? All these sorts of questions you would ask when I initially heard that he was under observation, and then suddenly he's managed to take his own life with his belt. All these sorts of things. Could he barricade himself in? All these questions I put to them, and there was no answer. There was no reasoning behind it, and it was just policies, procedures. He was on level 2 observations. He was watched every 15 minutes.
So there was no engagement with the questions that you actually asked?
They offered to come to my house, the one person, the ward manager, but it wasn't, the discussion we were having wasn't trending in the right way, because I wanted the answers to why my dad had his belt, why he was able to barricade himself in the room, all these answers, and they weren't signposting me to where to get the answers. They weren't giving me any form of support or assistance.
Did you also speak to staff to request medical records?
Yeah,
Was that the same conversation or a different one?
That was with the same person, and yeah, I was informed that that wasn't happening. So that's when the police officer, because the police initially investigated it, and they looked at it, and it was closed off pretty quickly. And then I highlighted this to the police officer, and then it got re-investigated, and they held my father's body back, so we couldn't have the funeral for, it felt like ages, but I don't know how long it was. And then when they closed it, because they couldn't investigate it, he said, what you need to do is you need to make a formal complaint to the trust,
Right.
and that's when you will get
A response.
a response. And you shouldn't have to take that.
No. And were you offered any, I think you've answered this question already, were you offered any support by the trust? Any emotional support or any other type of support following his death?
No, I moved, obviously the incident was in April. I moved back to, initially no, because I lived in Manchester. It wasn't until I moved back to the area around about October time that year, and I was treated as an outpatient. I was treated as an outpatient in Chelmsford because I refused to have treatment by Oyster Court, the community mental health team in Colchester, because I had the issues with them. I had the complaint, and I was going through the process with them over my dad. So they referred me to someone in, and yeah, the lady I spoke to was helpful. I got better and I got discharged, but I always kind of felt like it was, I don't know, I struggled to trust them fully, because I was identifying these trends and these issues with my dad's care, and I knew that they were the same people, the same trust.
I have one more general topic with a few subheadings which relate to investigations and inquests. And then I would like to move on to your recommendations, if I may. Now, there was a serious incident investigation that took place between July of 2011 and November of 2000.
Yep.
Apologies, July and November of 2012. Now, this followed your complaint, but were they linked? Do you know?
Yeah, I believe this was because of my complaint.
It was because of your complaint
Yeah.
that investigation took place.
I don't believe it would have taken place. It didn't feel like it was going to take place without a complaint.
Right.
Suddenly my complaint kind of moved things on a whole step forward.
I understand. And you set out in your witness statement in some detail a summary of its conclusions.
Yeah.
I would like to focus, if I may, on your views of this investigation. What impact, if any, did the investigation have on you?
To be honest, it raised more questions and issues than actually answered, because that's where I found out about the belt, the level 3 observations being downgraded to level 2. This is where they interviewed all the staff. A number of staff had second interviews, and this is where they kind of tried to drill down into a person having a belt. There was no search. Sorry, I'll reword that. This is where they identified that staff A said there was a belt and that they took it off him.
The inconsistencies.
Yeah, exactly. But they never drilled down, and they just left it. Oh, staff A says this, staff B said that, and that just answered more questions. That just asked more questions and more issues. And if someone said that to you about your loved one, he died with his belt. This person saying he had it, this person saying he was searched and we took it off him, this person saying we didn't. It just it made me want to know the truth, because I kind of got half-truths. I could see where people were lying, with the AMP saying, oh, I can't attend, I can't transfer him, but because I've got to see someone else, and then that later finding out not to be the case. And I was like, well, what are you doing about this? Are you holding them to account? What have you done? Because you've let one staff member's clearly lying. And yeah, it just unravelled, and I found more questions and more things I wanted answers to, and it didn't. It was in no way was it closure. It just raised more issues.
At paragraph 28 of your witness statement, you set out the narrative verdict of your father's death certificate.
Yeah.
As Mr. Oxton's risk of self-harm was correctly assessed, but there was an incomplete transfer of the risk assessment, resulting in a lower level of observation being applied. Mr. Oxton was left in possession of his belt, and the bedroom environment provided an opportunity to barricade the door and provided a point to achieve suspension. Do you have any concerns about this conclusion?
Yes, it felt like the inquest, again, didn't seek to find the truth, and they were made aware of the coroner regarding this, but at no point was there a desire to really investigate it and establish the full facts and what actually happened. So I wanted the narrative verdict, and I wanted the state to be held to account for it, which they were, but it still left those underlying questions about the transfer of the risk, the belt, and the risk assessment being lowered without any form of assessment by a medical professional.
So the questions were still unanswered,
Yeah,
as far as you were
exactly.
concerned?
It just left them.
Did you participate in your father's inquest?
Yeah, this is when I was undertaking the private or the civil claim with the trust through my solicitors, who was Glyn's based in Bristol. They provided a barrister, and I attended the inquest. Yeah.
And do you remember whether any of the staff members gave evidence, or were their witness statements taken as read?
No, there was no evidence given in form of that, and I was told that it isn't the inquest wasn't to identify blame. It was just to identify like the facts and like the surroundings. But to identify that, you have to identify the facts. It seemed like that they stopped. They identified the facts to a point, and then when it started identifying blame, they stopped at that point to not hold people to account.
Right. I would like to briefly touch on a few other legal proceedings before turning to your recommendations. As you've just mentioned, there was a civil claim that resulted in an out-of-court settlement, is that right?
Yeah, that was purely and simply to get them to hold them to account, because I felt like the trust didn't want to. There was never the only time the first apology I received from the trust was after the inquest and after the narrative verdict.
Right.
And you would think that it would have been done sooner.
In what form did you receive an apology from the trust? Do you remember?
The chief executive come up to me after the inquest.
Right.
Paul Scott, I believe. Scott was his surname.
Yes.
And yeah, he apologised for what happened to my dad, and yeah. But it was I was still upset from. Yes, I wanted the verdict that they were responsible, but it still didn't give me the answers I wanted.
Is it right that you also took part in Operation Ludlow by Essex Police, which investigated corporate manslaughter by the trust?
Yeah, that was a large number of families, and it was investigating them for corporate manslaughter.
Yes.
But that got to a stage where it was very hard to prove corporate manslaughter because of the high threshold. So then it got passed to...
Was it the HSE prosecution?
Yeah, the HSE one.
And you took part in the HSE prosecution, is that right?
I did, yeah.
And do you have anything you would like to say about that?
Yeah, what really shocked me was the fine. It was the sentencing, and that just kind of penalises the trust even more to prevent it from doing good and restrict them on funding wise. The only way I personally felt that there would be any sort of justice would be holding responsible to the people who had failed him in the organisation and those who had lied. Mm-hmm. And those are the real people responsible. And yeah.
Thank you. At paragraph 35 on page 10 of your statement, you state that you felt let down by the investigations. Can you tell us more about why you felt let down?
Again, that was kind of... Each time I would say to myself, that's it. I would say once I got the private prosecutor, the civil claim out of the way, I've got the answers. I didn't get the answers. I got them to admit that they were in the wrong, and I got the apology. So I'd be like, that's perfect. That's what, well, not perfect. I was satisfied, mm-hmm. And then I would get drawn back in by another one, the policing one. Mm-hmm. And then I'd be, I didn't really get the answers there, so I'll go for the HSE one. Mm-hmm. Then they got fined, and I thought, well, didn't really get any justice there, but they got found guilty. So then I would be, that'd be all I'll do. I'll end it there. And then I found this. And then I was like, well, surely this time I'll say my piece for the however many times, the inquest, the serious incident report, the police investigation, the HSE, all these, surely I'll find out the answers this time. Mm-hmm. So this is why I'm here again, to try and get those answers, because all those other previous investigations and inquiries have failed.
Thank you. I would like to now turn to the recommendations that you set out. They're at paragraph 36, page 11 of your statement. I wondered whether you would like to take them in turn and let us know what your recommendations are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I believe the following changes need to be made to prevent tragic deaths of those suffering with ill mental health in the future. Easier access to mental health services and decrease the waiting times is required to allow earlier intervention. I believe my father, if he was seen sooner when he was being re-referred, I said I'm not saying he would have fully recovered, and I'm not saying he would be here today, but that would have helped. A wider range of talking therapies, not just other than CBT, because that's what he had, should be available, and increase the high quality psychological therapies and specialist trauma. Ensure seamless transition between primary care, so the GP, and specialist mental health services. Again, that's kind of going on from the GP referring him all these times and him being rejected. Crisis resolution, home treatment and mental health teams need to be properly resourced so they can provide a level of care that is required. Invest in mental health to improve the understanding of mental illness and develop more effective treatments and interventions. Increase transparency between families and the trust with regards to concerns about the quality of care provided. In the event of a death, the NHS need to keep families informed as to internal investigations conducted and the outcome of these. Have specific staff members been found negligent, and what were the consequences? Again, you've got the issues that were raised. I've never been provided details as to what actually happened.
Yes.
We'll provide accessible support for families and carers who provide vital roles supporting individuals with mental health. Increased accountability for staff. Psychiatric negligence should be a criminal offence, and those found negligible should be prosecuted.
Yes. Do you have any further recommendations or observations that you would like to make to the inquiry at this stage?
No. I believe the HSE inquiry that my father was one of the I'm not sure, it was the core participants, and I believe in the verdict there was that was highlighted that there was another death,
Yes.
which was linked. I've not got the details to hand, but just like to highlight that as well, please.
Yes, I believe you're referring to the sentencing remarks and the HSE prosecutions,
Yes.
which refer to a death in very similar circumstances some 18 months prior to your father.
Yeah, I'd just like to make that, and just make that aware to yourself that there was a similar death, similar circumstances, 18 months previous, and heart goes out to that family because they've suffered similar as myself. But it makes you think, well, if the recommendations were, if there were recommendations for that, they'd have probably been very similar recommendations. My father's report, and could have been prevented.
Yes. Thank you very much. I have no further questions at this stage. Chair, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
Can I thank you very much indeed for coming to
Thank you.
give your evidence today?
Thank you for listening.
No,
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, we do have a photograph of Mr. Oxton's father. If I could ask for that to be played.
And a younger you.
Just a bit.
Thank you very much. Chair, I believe if we may rise for 10 minutes to see whether there are any additional questions. If there are additional questions, we will return. If there are none, then I believe we are adjourned until tomorrow.
10 o'clock tomorrow.
10 o'clock tomorrow, when we will hear from Emma Sorrell and Linda Costard.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.